Now, I'm delighted to introduce our speaker, Mauricio Souza Neto. Mauricio is a primary, secondary, and university teacher with experience of teaching through arts and using language to promote social justice. He holds a master's degree in Applied Linguistics. He is a Fulbright alumni and a board member of REPENSE, Black Language Scholars Network. During Mauricio's talk, we recommend watching in speaker view. And if you have any questions, please type them in the Q&A box. Well, without any further ado, please share your screen, Mauricio, and welcome.
Hello, y'all. Can everybody see my screen? Can you hear me, John?
Yes, I can hear you, and I can see your screen.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the presentation. Today, probably you're gonna hear some kind of buzzing sound. I apologize in advance. We're having blackout sessions here in my city. Anyway, approaching culture teaching and including diverse literature in upper secondary. Everything that I would say about myself was already said, so I'll just go straight to the point. Now, we'll have some questions to start with and give life to this presentation, which is actually a dialogue, a talk between all of us. So what is culture and how can it be taught? What's the relation between language and culture? Is culture part of language or is language part of culture? What's the relation we have among all those stuff? And how does that impact on our teaching, especially when we think about teaching language to people? I would start with the classical Levi-Strauss definition of culture. To him, a potato just taken out from nature is considered nature. However, when you boil a potato, it is already culture. Every little person has a different way of boiling potato. Like you put salt, don't add salt, you add pepper, you add lime, you add this or that. My grandmother would add some kind of orange. She said would give delicious flavor to it. I myself did not like very much. But anyway, as you see, we start from a less complex, still complex definition of culture. So everything that is modified or created by humans, I will consider as culture for the purpose of this presentation. And when you think about that, we are automatically left to the question, how can culture be taught? And then, although the title is Approaching Culture Teaching, I would say that culture cannot be taught. It must be lived. It must be felt. But how? How can we foster our students to get in touch, to get in contact with different cultures, and why should we do it? Why should we ourselves engage in different cultures? And then, I'll answer those questions in a moment. What is the relation between language and the culture? I would say that language is culture and culture is expressed through language. We are human beings, and we think that makes difference between human beings and the other animals, so to speak, is that we possess language. We can communicate through language. And we can only be ourselves with our views, our beliefs, our identities through language. Without language, we cease to be. how can we express our emotions, our feelings, if not through language? And then here, I'm not talking about verbal language, but also language in a broader way. We express ourselves through art. We paint, we draw, we sculpt. We do many things to communicate, to express ourselves. And then, of course, the $1 million question: how can we foster our students to experience culture, and why should we? I would then, before answering this question, move to what I like to call very complicated or $1 billion questions. And then I'm talking about my Brazilian reference. So I live in Brazil, I live northeast of Brazil, considered as one of the poorest regions in my country. Demographically, we have the majority of Black people or people from different ethnicities in here. Although, or despite all of that, still we have the mainstream white patriarchy governing and ruling our space, and that is seen through our curricula. Our school curricula is full of that, and I'll tell you why. Through these questions, what cultural aspects of other peoples or countries do you share with your students through literature? Actually, how much do you and your students know about Zimbabwe and Lesotho, for instance? If you teach English outside in a country that has English as the native language, that question should be very centered and very important for you to think and to build your syllabi. Nowadays, we think about English as a global language, English as a lingua franca, and all of the stuff, but we are still considering some very specific spots, geographically speaking, when we think about that. Here in Brazil, for instance, we think about Nigeria, but still having the idea that Nigeria is a kind of a unity. We don't problematize things such as Yoruba people and Igbo people or other people who live in Nigeria. We only think about, oh, Nigeria because it's outside of the US or outside of England. How many BIPOC writers are there in your syllabi? Who are the people represented in your teaching materials, for example? We realize that here in Brazil, all language books, especially English books, if you think about big companies, big printing house, it has some kind of neutral images, and it would raise discussions, but not just some questions such as racial issues, such as religious issues, ableism, or things like that. Thinking of that, me and a friend of mine, we designed a course to help English teachers to design their teaching materials focusing on diversity, thinking of racial and ethnic differences. And it was so successful that we had to open up for all language that we teach here in Brazil, which was a huge success. And I will share with you a little bit of that later. Now, who are the people represented in the literature books chosen by your school or you? Actually, how do you select literature? How much learner or family involvement is there in that selection? A little before my talk, Silvana was talking to you about the importance of family involvement in selecting literature, in selecting and in creating the syllabus for your courses, and I could not agree more with her. If you happen to have BIPOC characters in the literature in your classes, how are they represented? Are they protagonists? Are they marginalized? So we see that, especially related to children's book, we're gonna have from 5 years ago until today, we would have an increased number of representation of, for example, people of color. However, we're still focusing on people of color thinking about fashion style, thinking about braiding hair, or even thinking about marginalized people, everything related to violence, related to the police or things like that. But is that all? Is that everything that can be shown about these people? Are there LGBTQIA plus people in the literature you choose? How about disabled or different abled characters? And how about characters from different ethnicities, religious or political leanings? And how are they represented if you happen to have them in the literature you chose in school? Why should that matter? As Silvana said before, and I think I very much for sending me her presentations to use some of her insights as well in here. If you can see it, you can be it. She was talking about children's literature specifically. But then when you come to upper secondary, we're still working with Shakespeare and some other kinds of literature that, although it's very interesting, very nice to work with, we still lack lots and lots of debate in our class. As teachers, we have a social responsibility to get students and make them think, make them know the world. And how can they know the world, for example, they have no money to travel? How can they know things related to other places? So I believe literature is one good way to do that. But how then we can do it? And then if you think about diversity, what is diversity? And diversity of what? Diversity to whom? I love Vernon Meyer's definition of diversity. Diversity is being invited to the party, and inclusion is being asked to dance. And as fascinating as it is, I found one other definition on the internet yesterday, and I had to add to my presentation. Because diversity, yes, is being invited to the party, inclusion is being asked to dance, but belonging is dancing like no one's watching. And then if you think about, if you see it, you can be it. And school is one of the places that students, the teenagers, kids spend most of their life, I mean, not most of their life, but most of their time, for example, about their teenagers, for example. It is in the school that they learn a certain thing, that they see certain things. And sometimes at home, they have no opportunity to see that much diversity. And of course, when you think about the diversity in literature, not necessarily, but we tend to think about racial issues, but not everything is only skin deep. We have to think beyond that. Yes, we must include, as I've been doing for the past 5 years, talking about racism through language, and racism not only talking about the color of your skin, but racism talking about the country where you're from, your religion, your beliefs, and everything. But then we must include other stuff, as I mentioned before, LGBTQIA+. We must include ableism or fat studies. Have you realized that we rarely have fat people's representation? And then we are always like cracking egg thinking of, oh, we should not say that, we should say like this. Here in Brazil, we have 15 different ways to avoid the word fact, and they are as complicated to use as fact. And when we think about language books, we only have fat people described eating like a lot of hamburger, and the question, what should she do? She ate 6 hamburgers. What should she do? So students should answer something like, oh, she should lose weight. But like, really, how critical are we helping our students to be with such a stereotype? And this is the reality we have here in Brazil. So this is the books worked for upper secondary in a school and here in Salvador, the place I live. So kids had to read The Catcher in the Rye, Shakespeare's Perfect Night, School of Good and Evil, Ender's Game. And as fascinating as the discussions raised could be, we still lack discussions or debates about Black people, about indigenous people, about LGBTQIA+ people. We still lack a lot. We can do many things with those books. I'm not saying that they're not important. The thing is, why only those books? Why not include more books that we can have like a real life experience? What do we have about indigenous people? And actually, if you live in different countries, what kind of literature you have there that is possible to work with? Of course, nowadays we have Amazon, thank goodness for that. But besides that, it's not everything that have, for example, here in Brazil that people can buy. Like the dollar is a sky high for our currency. And then when you think about buying one of those books, everything becomes something like 100 of our currency. And who has money to spend on the 4 books of 100 of our currency each, which is like 400, I'm sorry. Then we must think about our socioeconomic class of students also. Then the thing is not, David was the editor of the Clearly Journal, which was fascinating. I wrote a review on The Hate You Give, and the title was Decentering Whiteness in ELT, which was a fantastic work. Congratulations, David. The thing is, when we think about those books, we should more than decenter whiteness or everything that is not, like white, male, middle class, whatever. We must not necessarily decenter. We must a-center all that. When you decenter, we still have the idea of peripheries. So my goal here is to show that approaching culture, it is possible for us to eliminate the idea of a center and have an a-centered society. But how do we do that? By showing students different realities. And how do we do that? Through literature. I made this very short so that we could have more time to raise the issues and have a discussion or a debate afterwards. I have some references in here, and you can find me on Instagram and also on my email. Do email me. I can send you the references. I can send you the presentation, and also we can chat and share our thoughts. Well, that's going to be it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Let's see if there's some questions in the Q&A box.
So So I ask, is it important to have a background knowledge of the culture to understand the language? Um, it depends on what you consider language. If you have a broader view of language, yes. Let's think about non-verbal communication. So, for example, here in Brazil, the Portuguese language, we say something like a long time ago, doing this gesture. Now, when I was in the USA, and I was talking to some colleagues, and they said like, oh, you know, like a long time ago, and they were just looking at me like, where do you want me to go? Because of that, so we can expand the idea of language to non-verbal communication. Then we think about other forms of language and other forms of culture. I think so, yeah. We still think about here in Brazil and one idea of the censoring whiteness in ELT, for example, or in our English classes, is that, oh, we could talk about lack of vernacular English, for example, and then have examples of that. I think it's nice, but it's still centering the USA as an important, you know, like base for scientific or literary knowledge. And it's not true. Like, what do we read from people? I mean, you know, like writers from Kenya, for example, writers from Zimbabwe, from Lesotho, from New Zealand. I think we should include those people in our syllabi so that we can expand our view of the world. Otherwise, we're still going to have, yes, so we have LGBTQ, IA plus, but still United States and still white or something still European. But I have no idea of, you know, like stories, like life stories of this same situation in Lesotho, for example. Oh, thank you, Luz. And Iman, would it be interesting to introduce several cultures like teaching English, like Anglophone culture? Yes, even though, even if you think about, let's say, in the USA, so I'm a Brazilian person, so I lived in the USA for a year, and it was fascinating for me, and at the same time shocking, like how one state could be so different from the other. Not only in terms of accent, but also in terms of culture, the way they behave, things like that. I lived in Tucson, Arizona. People knew each other. They would say, hey, good morning, how are you? So when I went to New York, I was ordering coffee and I was like, hey, good morning, how are you? And the lady was looking at me like, yeah, you know, medium roast or dark roast. And I was just like, oh my God, that's the real one. So that is also related to language and culture. How can we know that if we don't live that? That's the idea of, we don't teach that because, you know, like we can tell people, but people would only understand if they, you know, face this situation. Yes, and when we think about usually here in Brazil, I prefer the term Black people because, you know, Black people, white people, here you have the idea of people of color, which is non-white people. With the BIPOC, we're talking about Black, Indigenous, and people of color, the POC. In the US, in the past years, they used POC, talk about the people of color. Everything that was non-white. So Black people, Indigenous people, Asian people, everything that was non-white, they would consider as POC. And then they made it explicit that they're talking about Black, Indigenous, and people of color, meaning like non-white people. And yes, I still think it's a little bit of, you know, I don't know, confusion, terminology, but still it's something that it's good for us to know, to get empowered, so that we can empower our students to be whoever they want to be, like whenever they want to be it. the preceding culture was so distinguished to like us to know. Yes, that's the thing. Sometimes we don't know anything about the culture. I'm giving examples of Zimbabwe and Lesotho because it was part of a discussion I was having with a friend of mine the other day. But then the thing is, like, still, when you think about, I'll give you this example again of Nigeria. Here in Brazil, we think about, oh, it's good that we are working with Nigerian people, thinking of Chinua Achebe Things Fall Apart, or Chimamanda Adichie's piece of writing, which is excellent, but it's not all. So here we still think Nigeria as a kind of unity, as we think Africa as a country. So how do we change that in our students' mind? First of all, we must research about it and know everything that we are doing. It's not like, okay, so we have this Nigerian book, good, we are having diversity. No, like what kind of diversity are we presenting there? So we still have predominantly male characters being, the protagonist of the story, and then, like suffer and love stories. What kind of stories being told among that? So what should we do to make our students engage with different realities, with different cultures? And in that case, I believe we should, we should research before and then know specifically what we would like our students to know about it and why do we want our students to know about that. Is it to promote intercultural debate, raise issues about intercultural things? It depends on your view. It's important that it's not only you. Teaching is it's such a big responsibility, so you cannot do that alone. You need your school, you need the coordinator, you need the supervisor, principals, you need the family to interact, you need the family to be part of it, and the students also to be part of it. Of course, one idea is that you can have a list of 10 books, and then you and your students could choose like 2 books, but sometimes it's not possible to work with books. We can work with short stories, for example. Isn't anything so amazing as working with Alice Walker's short stories, for example, or many other writers. So that's one of the ideas that you can work like diverse literature in your classroom. So if you send me an email, I can send you some web links, and I can send you this presentation as well as book list or authors list that you can get to know and work with in your class if you think it's nice and necessary to work with.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your inspirational talk, Mauricio. I think expanding our view of culture and people and also communities is so important for all of us, no matter where we are in the world. So thank you so much.